During the Second World War, one U.S. Army Infantry Division repeatedly proved itself as America's finest.
I saw many men killed and wounded on that beach.
Leading the way into action in Africa, Italy, and on to bloody Omaha Beach.
They were dropping hand grenades on us. They were throwing mortars in on us. The water was red with blood.
Lightly armed GIs who stood their ground against Hitler's best SS Panzers.
We didn't think we were going to last. I think that was as scared as I was.
They are the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. Sunrise on the 6th of June, 1944, D-Day. Off Omaha Beach, Normandy, thousands of men from the US 1st Infantry Division approach as a massive Allied bombardment hits the shoreline ahead.
One of my men came to me and he said, "Sergeant Reynolds, do you think we're going to make it through this one?" And I told him I was just as concerned as he was.
They are the first wave in the huge amphibious assault to liberate Nazi-occupied Europe, a turning point in the war. The men of the 1st Division, known as the Big Red One, are already veterans. But now they face a virtually impossible mission. Layers of barbed wire, countless mines, and a deadly hail of machine gun fire raining down from the cliffs above.
They felt that it'd just be a cakewalk for us on Omaha Beach.
This will be one of the bloodiest days in American history. And the men of the Big Red One are front and center. The 1st Infantry Division of the United States Army was founded on the 24th of May, 1917, as America prepared to enter the First World War. And in October, they are the first US soldiers to fight against the Kaiser.
They were on the front line throughout the campaign from 1917 on, and I think they gained a reputation as being one of the best, if not the best, division in the U.S. Army during World War I.
They suffered heavy losses, but won respect as a fierce combat unit, the Fighting First. They had also gained another nickname based on their distinctive shoulder patch, the Big Red One.
A lot of the soldiers felt that because they had the number 1 on their uniforms, they had to live up to the fact that they were number 1.
And again, they led the way into America's war with Hitler.
The reputation of the Big Red One is of an aggressive infantry unit that is always at the forefront of whatever overseas action America chooses to take part in.
On the 1st of August 1942, they sailed for Europe under the command of Major General Terry Allen.
Hard drinking, scruffy, uncaring about his appearance, but aggressive, belligerent, very much became the persona of the Big Red One.
He was a fighter, he was very courageous, he was gutsy. You never knew what Terry was going to do once he was faced with a combat situation.
Even the most intense battlefield training in Britain could only partly prepare them for the horrors ahead.
Fighting as an infantryman is personal. You don't do your killing or your dying from a long way away. You've got to meet your enemy and defeat them whilst you're able to smell their breath. It also means acceptance of casualties, of the brutality of combat. It builds up a real sense of comradeship with the men around you, because your life truly does depend on them, and vice versa.
They were organised as a triangular division, with 3 infantry regiments totalling around 14,000 men. Each supported by artillery, engineering, medical, and tank battalions. In October 1942, the Big Red One departed for their first real action. The Allied amphibious invasion of North Africa, Operation Torch. The Allies' plan was to launch an invasion by air and sea that would force the Axis out of North Africa and provide a launch pad for the liberation of southern Europe. On the 8th of November, the Big Red One led the way into Algeria. Under fire from the colonial Vichy French troops, clients of the Nazis.
I went in with the assault troops. I was a junior officer and I was expendable, I guess. It was the first time that I had been exposed to enemy fire.
In some chaos, they pushed towards their objective, the town of Oran.
By and large, we were disorganized. It was an all-new game to us. We learned to throw away the book at that point. And by the time we reached the outskirts of Oran, we were beginning to settle down.
But to capture Oran, they had to fight their way through stiff Vichy opposition in 2 days of combat. Major General Allen then addressed his victorious troops.
You have won your objective and have acquitted yourselves in a most creditable manner. I wish to extend my deep appreciation and to pay homage to our gallant dead and to our sorely wounded.
It was a morale-boosting early victory for the Big Red One, and Operation Torch was a resounding Allied success. The division's lead unit was the 16th Infantry Regiment. Benjamin Hilton is Vice President of the regiment's Historical Society.
In front of us, we've got 2 original field jackets from the Second World War. This particular jacket is the M1941 field jacket, which was worn by a 1st Division veteran. This particular jacket was made in a lighter sort of khaki colour. As the war progressed, they were made in a sort of darker green. The M1941 field jacket wasn't a particularly well-designed jacket. It wasn't particularly practical. There was only a couple of pockets in there which weren't ideal for transporting things. It was eventually replaced by the M1943 field jacket, which was much more practical design. It had 4 large external pockets. They do fit a K-ration box perfectly, which is a lot more useful. It was made of a windproof cotton, so it would retain the heat a lot better in more extreme climates. And it was just much more well received by the troops, mainly because of the additional storage space they had. You just have to remember that these guys were living out of their pockets for weeks on end. The 1st Division patch is obviously the iconic Big Red One. The legend says that when the division adopted the patch in 1918, that the troops were cutting the Red One out of cloths off the field caps from German dead and prisoners.
The Big Red One continued their advance into Tunisia. The Vichy French had offered little resistance. But now they came up against battle-hardened German soldiers. The Afrika Korps, commanded by the fearsome Erwin Rommel. This would be their first real test. In early 1943, Rommel planned a swift counterattack. He wanted to stop the Allied advance, splitting his forces in two. He would strike through the hills, using the Kasserine Pass to outflank the Allies, including the 1st. On the 19th of February, the 21st Panzer Division launched a surprise attack.
The plan was to push his armoured forces through the Kasserine Pass and to hit the Americans before they were prepared and give them a bit of a hiding in what would be their first major battle with the Germans.
Initially, the Allies held. But then Rommel added 2 more armoured divisions to the attack, forcing a disorganised retreat that included the fighting first.
German panzer forces, in effect, caused a panzer fright, as they used to call it. And so the Americans, who were inexperienced, really struggled to cope with their vastly more experienced foes.
Having advanced almost 80 kilometres, Rommel's panzers were halted by the appalling weather, rocky terrain, and Allied reinforcements, who unleashed a massive artillery barrage, forcing an Axis retreat. By the 25th of February, Allied forces had retaken the corpse-strewn Kasserine Pass and all the lost ground. The two sides ended where they had started, at the cost of around 1,000 Axis and over 6,000 Allied casualties, including more than 240 lost in just one battalion from the 1st. Their advance now continued through Tunisia, until dawn on the 23rd of March, when stopped by an artillery barrage at the desert oasis of El Guettar. Here they met an old foe from the Kasserine Pass, the 10th Panzer Division, whose troops quickly overran their lines. Two panzers approached Major General Allen's divisional headquarters, but getting out of the way was the last thing on Allen's mind.
I will like hell pull out, and I'll shoot the first bastard who does.
When the Germans attacked, the Big Red One just refused to yield. It refused to give ground, and it met the Germans and took them on.
They unleashed a maelstrom of anti-tank and artillery fire, destroying 30 panzers.
Big Red One's success at Al Guettar was a very big deal because it was the first time in the war that American troops, and the Big Red One in particular, had met German panzer forces and beaten them.
The 1st Division, I think, proved to the Germans, if to no one else, that the Americans were going to be a force to be reckoned with.
The Big Red One honed their combat skills for over 3 months, until May, when 250,000 Axis troops surrendered. The North African campaign was over. But their newly won reputation would quickly push them back to the front line, once again front and center for the invasion of Europe through Italy. To remove Mussolini and alleviate pressure on the Eastern Front, helping Soviet Russia. It would start with Sicily. US forces were led by firebrand General George S. Patton. He had his own unique way of declaring his hard-won respect for the bloody First.
I want those sons of bitches. I won't go without them.
Patton really was counting on Terry Allen and the 1st Division to lead the American charge once they got to Sicily.
10th of July, 1943. The big guns of the US and Royal Navies unleashed a massive bombardment of the port of Gela. As the men of the Big Red One approached the shore, their aim was to capture the Ponte Olivo airfield, 8 kilometers inland from Gela, and do it quickly. They fought their way across the beach against fascist Italian troops. Gela fell. But as they advanced on the airfield, the defenders mounted a ferocious counterattack to retake Gela, backed by the awesome firepower of a unique Panzer Division.
The Hermann Göring Panzer Division were a strange unit. They were paratroopers equipped with tanks. It married up veteran Fallschirmjäger, some of Nazi Germany's most successful, most determined troops, with their panzers. And that made for, really an elite.
As they quickly proved, punching through the First's front line until stopped by a naval bombardment and Allied airstrikes. This massive fire support helped them force the panzers into a retreat. Finally, on the 12th of July, almost 27 hours later than planned, the Big Red One secured Ponte Olivo. It had been the heaviest fighting they had seen so far. But they now faced a challenge on a whole new scale. A fortified mountaintop town, Troina, defended by 2 divisions.
To take Troina was to break the German defensive line. They had to launch a massive assault, and then it was down to hand-to-hand, house-to-house fighting.
And the 1st Division runs into one hellacious storm of artillery fire, machine gun fire.
It took 6 brutal days under constant Axis counterattacks to take Troina, causing several hundred more casualties for the division. An often miserable recuperation only found some modest relief through the impressive postal links home.
So here I've got a few letters and postcards from a private Joseph Carmine Santaniello. He was actually awarded the Silver Star at Troina. Essentially what happened was he'd been seriously wounded in combat, and he was returning to the aid station when he observed his company trying to withdraw, and they were pinned down under fire. So Joseph went back to a good firing position and provided a little bit of cover to his troops trying to withdraw to allow them to safely manoeuvre out of harm's way. So after the Battle of Troina, he had this postcard, which would have been written probably while he was recuperating from his injuries, addressed it to his daughter. He'd written it on August the 28th, 1943. I hope when you get this card, it will find you in the best of health. As for me, I'm in the best of health, so until I hear from you, love and kiss to Mother, your Dad. I sure miss you, dear. Very much. Love, Dad. You do find a lot of these letters that men won't really reveal the extent of what they're going through. It's almost like they're trying to shelter their families from, the true horror of what they're having to live through on a daily basis. For Joseph to essentially enter the war in North Africa, fight right through to the end into Czechoslovakia and survive with only obviously one injury is very, very, very rare. For example, the division, when they invaded Normandy, a lot of the men were replacements because they took such a battering in Sicily.
During the war, the First suffered more than 20,000 casualties, requiring constant replacements. These new men, usually totally inexperienced, often faced a tough ride against the cynical veterans, who now depended on one another instinctively. Following the liberation of Sicily, the first returned to Britain, now led by Major General Clarence Hübner, himself promoted from the ranks.
He was a crusty old soldier, a real disciplinarian, kind of in the mold of Patton. There were a lot of officers and enlisted men who did not like his style. He had them go through basic training all over again.
Hails bales, we've been killing Germans for months now, and they are teaching us to shoot a rifle? It doesn't make any sense.
They had to be ready for another first, now leading the way to liberate North Europe, D-Day.
Because of their experience, they were chosen as the lead division to land at Omaha Beach.
A hellish 6-kilometer stretch of the Normandy coastline, but led by veteran sergeants such as Harley Reynolds, still just 19.
I was in the first wave with a special assignment on the invasion of North Africa, and I was in the first wave with special assignment on the invasion of Sicily. And they felt that we were experienced enough that we'd make this one. It'd just be a cakewalk or a walk-on for us on Omaha Beach.
We rehearsed continuously. We were crawling over the sides of boats on rope ladders down into landing craft and storming beaches in England before we participated in the actual invasion at Omaha Beach.
So we've got in front of us here the American assault jacket. When they came ashore, the equipment that they were wearing, the idea was that this would really help them by carrying the essential kit they needed. One of the good features was the quick release tabs, where essentially it was designed so if you had to get the jacket off in a hurry, you pull those and it could be taken off in a matter of seconds. There's 2 small pockets for frag grenades. They carry their shelter half in the back, toilet articles. Here we've got the American M1910 bayonet. The idea was on D-Day that these weapons were to provide some real up-close and personal support, because when you're clearing trenches or bunkers or enemy positions, you need something that you're going to rely on if you do come face to face with an enemy soldier.
The D-Day plan was for the Big Red One to land east of the very inexperienced 29th Infantry Division on Omaha Beach. The toughest job on D-Day.
A whole stretch of open sand, totally overlooked by high bluffs where the Germans had located their defensive positions. Heavy machine guns, mortars, anti-tank guns.
Many would land in the LCVP, Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel, or Higgins boat. Named for their designer, Andrew Jackson Higgins. Their shallow draft got up to 36 troops close to the shore, but not over Omaha's notorious sandbanks or deadly obstacles. With over 23,000 produced, they were one of the engineering miracles that powered the Allies to victory. On the evening of the 5th of June, thousands of men from the 1st Infantry Division left for France. Around 0300 hours on the 6th, they dropped anchor 22 kilometers off the coast and waited.
I didn't know what fear was. I knew I was frightened, but I was also excited.
I was on a British troop ship, and the last meal on the American ships was steak and eggs. We had macaroni and cheese on this British troop ship, macaroni and cheese. That was our last meal before we hit Omaha Beach.
The small Higgins boats were tossed around in the rough seas, so far from shore.
They are being seasick over the side, into their helmets, and thinking that their only release from that will be into the into the teeth of German machine gun fire. And that must have been just terrifying.
Overhead, hundreds of bombers devastated the shoreline. Followed by battleships and cruisers.
We were sitting out there, the bombers going over, the ships firing on the beaches. Such awesome firepower.
The bombers had bombed too far inland, so they killed a lot of Norman cows, but left virtually all of the defenses untouched. The same thing happened with the Navy. They were supposed to knock out the concrete bunkers that were there. They too overshot the mark.
The Allies had made another big mistake, failing to spot the arrival of the German 352nd Infantry Division close to Omaha Beach.
Our intelligence was fooled on that beach. The Germans outdid us on that one. They slipped a whole division of German troops on that beach that we didn't know about.
And then when we got to the beach, they were waiting for us.
There was explosions, so they were just going right down the line. See, the 4 boats were coming in, and they were just going right down the line. And the machine guns would traverse. You could hear the machine gun bullets going off the ramp.
One of my men was beginning to sort of lose it. And he came to me and he said, "Sergeant Reynolds, do you think we're going to make it through this one? We've been through a lot of them, and the odds are going to catch up with us somewhere." And I told him I was just as concerned as he was.
The Germans were traversing, hitting all the boats coming in. And we weren't about to go out the ramp, but before we could go over the side, the boat was blown up. I remember an explosion. I remember the boat going up and over, and that's all I remembered.
I said to my guys, I'm going over the side. This is life or death, and I'm going over, and I'm going over the right side because most of the fire was coming from that angle. There was pieces of body everywhere, and you had to wade through them, and that part of the beach, the water was red with blood, and it's a terrible, terrible thing to even talk about. Everybody dumped their packs to get out of the water and be able to run and stuff. And then you would try to time the machine gun fires so that you could make a few steps and dive between them and hope it missed you and get as low as you could. And you wanted to get that 300 or 400 yards from the edge of the water up to the beach. And that looked like 3 miles.
Within the first hour, some of the Big Red One's units had suffered heavy casualties.
I saw many, many men killed and wounded on that beach while we're held up there.
I was scared, but you don't want to act scared in front of your buddies. You know, this stuff, apple pie and ice cream and democracy, that's crock of bull. We infantry guys, you were fighting for your buddy, the guy on the right and the left of you. You didn't want to let them down.
Colonel Taylor, commanding the 1st Division's 16th Infantry Regiment, started to rally the survivors.
There are 2 kinds of people who are staying on this beach. Those who are dead, and those who are going to die. Now let's get the hell out of here.
Terry Allen had a motto for the division, which was "Nothing in hell must stop the 1st Infantry Division." And he drove that into the men's heads until they were convinced that they could overcome anything that the enemy might throw at them.
I made the shingle embankment on the very first run with about 80 pounds of ammunition and equipment without stopping. And my men were right with me.
As soon as you got up there, they were dropping hand grenades on us. They were throwing mortars in on us. One of the English ships, somebody relayed the coordinates to him so they knew how to send their shells in. They started to help us. you'd hear, and then it would land up on top. If it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be here today.
Allied destroyers virtually beached themselves a few hundred meters offshore in order to target the German gun emplacements on the cliffs.
They took 6 hours to get to the top. There were barbed wire entanglements, minefields. It was a very difficult, close-run thing.
It took until noon to secure most of the beach, but more bloody hours to clear the cliffs. By the end of the day, the Allies had established a beachhead. But the Fighting First alone had suffered over 1,200 casualties.
Thousands of boys were lost that day at Omaha Beach. It was the worst place in the world to go in.
For the next month, progress was slow as they fought through the thick bocage hedgerows of Normandy.
And that was a new kind of battle for us, 6 or 7 feet high and stuff growing in the middle of it, and you'd be in one and think you're safe, and just then they'd come over that hedgerow and you're almost nose to nose with your enemy there, and they knew where we were and we didn't know where they were. So that was a bad experience, but again, because of our great small arms, we probably got out of a lot of those without getting killed because we had the better small arms.
Here we've got the US M1 rifle, which entered service with the US Army in the late 1930s. It's a semi-automatic rifle in .30-06 caliber, holds about 8 rounds in these little en-bloc clips. It really gave the Americans a good edge over the German military because they had much better firepower. What's quite interesting is that the 16th Infantry Regiment were used to trial these canvas slings, which replaced the earlier leather 1907 sling. The later canvas sling was cheaper to produce, it was easily manufactured, and it's easily adjustable by this small tab. What we've come across through memoirs, through interviews, even official combat reports, is that the men absolutely loved this weapon. They thought it was fantastic. It was just so reliable and so well loved by the troops.
Apart from their rifles, the infantry's only major firepower came from mortars and a punchy heavy machine gun, which was over 20 years old. The M1919 was a .30 caliber belt-fed machine gun. About 1 meter long and weighing 14 kilos, it was relatively lightweight and versatile, while still packing a punch. It proved extraordinarily reliable, working even in the worst conditions. And by 1945, production exceeded 430,000. At the end of July, they swapped the hedgerow barriers for piles of rubble as they blasted their way through Marigny to help take Saint-Lô.
The town itself had taken an absolute beating from Allied air power and really had been devastated. But that made it a lot easier for the defenders, who turned every wrecked house into a strong point. And so the Big Red One had to fight through almost inch by inch.
For over 2 harsh months after D-Day, the First had battled the unexpectedly tough resistance in Normandy before helping to force a Nazi retreat. By September 1944, they reached the German city of Aachen and the next barrier to the Nazi heartland, the fearsome defenses of the Siegfried Line.
Anti-tank ditches, pillboxes, dragon's teeth, machine gun nests. This is where the Americans were looking to force a breach so they could get into Germany as quickly as possible and end the war.
The Big Red One are now given another tough assignment: to storm the heavily defended high ground overlooking Aachen.
The aim of the operation was to bring observed fire down onto Aachen itself and to try and force the German defenders into submission. Unfortunately, it didn't work like that.
We were given the mission of maintaining the ridge, and they threw everything they had at us. We were there for 39 days.
Fighting the relentless German counterattacks that tried to retake the high ground and destroy their artillery. On the 10th of October, General Hübner delivered an ultimatum to the Germans.
Which, in effect, said, surrender or we will bomb you to oblivion. Unfortunately, the German commander decided not to surrender.
So the Allies unleashed over 5,000 shells on the city. As aircraft rained death. But the Nazis fought on.
They launched a major attack against us. It was a fierce battle that was only saved by the fact that we had the core artillery.
The Allied onslaught continued for more than a week.
The fighting for Aachen was brutal. They were using 105mm and even 155mm artillery pieces, which are very, very big pieces of kit, to destroy individual machine gun nests, to kill individual snipers, until, with very few of them left, they eventually surrendered.
We cleaned them out house by house, street by street, till on the 21st of October, Aachen, or what was left of it, surrendered.
But the cost to the first was immense, suffering more than 1,000 casualties.
Victory in Aachen was symbolically hugely important because it was the first major German city to fall to the Anglo-Americans. So no longer could Hitler and the Nazis tell their populace that they were keeping the enemy beyond the frontiers.
Now just 5 kilometers inside Nazi Germany, the Big Red One faced a nightmare of epic proportions. A slaughter that would cost them more than 6,500 casualties, blasting through an extraordinary natural barrier and perfect defensive position, the Hurtgen forest.
The forest you might find in a grim fairy tale. It was just dark and gloomy.
Everything is constantly wet.
We were used to going to bed at night or in a tent or something. All at once, you don't have anything to sleep under. You don't go to bed because you're on patrol or the patrol's on you.
There are hidden machine gun emplacements everywhere.
There's no night and there's no day. It's just constant warfare.
The Germans would lob in artillery shells that would hit the top of the trees, creating what's called an airburst. And so the shrapnel would beat down on the soldiers from above.
Infantry's not a good place to be if you want to be in the war.
The fighting first bled in the Hurtgen forest for 3 weeks, until the 7th of December 1944, when they were finally allowed to refit and rest. They had been under fire for nearly 6 months.
We had been on the front line for 171 days. So they come up and told us, get your platoons together, what's left of them. Your platoon should have 42 men and you're down to about 15 to 20. And they said, you're gonna take us back to Verviers, Belgium. We're gonna get hot showers, we're gonna get clean clothes, we're gonna have a hot meal.
Most studies at the time found that infantrymen would become degraded after kind of 40, 45 days of combat. It was a tired and almost kind of hollowed out division in some ways, you know, come the end of 1944.
The Big Red One desperately needed proper rest to recover, but Hitler had other plans.
They came by and said, "Lucky, get the guys up, we're going back up." I got all the guys up and we went back up and never got off the line again, so that was it till the war ended.
On the 16th of December, the Nazis launched a surprise counterattack with 30 divisions into the forested Ardennes region of Belgium. Now known for the shape it punched into the Allied front line, the Battle of the Bulge.
Basically, it was throwing all of the infantry and armored divisions that the Germans had left on the Western Front against the American lines. Many of the American units that were on the west side of that bulge crumbled. But the 1st Division just would not yield. They fought the Germans tooth and nail. They did everything in their power to prevent the Germans from breaking through. It was remarkable that the 1st Division was able to withstand the onslaught that the Germans kept throwing at them.
In the worst winter for years, these bold infantrymen engaged General Sepp Dietrich's elite SS panzers near the Belgian town of Buchtenbach.
Terribly cold conditions. They were struggling to get resupplies of ammunition, of food, of water. Amidst all of that, they're being attacked by pretty much the best troops the Germans have at that stage of the war.
Even for men who had survived the horrors of Omaha Beach, the Battle of Buchenbach set a new standard for ferocity.
We didn't think we were going to last, really, with the shelling and everything and the way they were attacking, and we had no air cover. I think that was as scared as I was.
1st Division got slaughtered again in the Belgian Bulge in the Ardennes. We lost a lot of men.
And they said, you know, nothing that we have experienced thus far was as difficult as the fighting was during the Battle of the Bulge.
But it paid off. Hitler's desperate last offensive in the West broke on the Allies' stubborn defiance.
The role of infantry in any conflict is to take and hold ground. It is up close and personal.
But to take ground, you often have to cross rivers, and the first now faced one of Europe's biggest, the Rhine.
The Rhine is fast flowing and it is hundreds of meters wide. You have to have a bridge of some sort.
The Nazis had already blown most of the Rhine bridges, but then the Allies found one still standing at Remagen.
When the Americans thrust forward and saw that it was still intact, it was a godsend.
After a rapid strike, the Allies seized the badly damaged bridge, but the Germans fought desperately to stop the 1st and other units crossing.
All I remember is debris everywhere, and there were still Germans laying there, shot and killed. Of course, we double time, across the whole bridge.
Under cover from scores of heavy machine guns.
And I never saw so many anti-aircraft guns. They were everywhere, because they were trying to save the bridge from being bombed. The few German aircraft that were coming in, they were just firing away all the time, these 50 calibers.
Just after the Big Red One crossed the bridge at Remagen, it finally fell down.
Unfortunately, when the bridge collapsed, they had a whole bunch of ambulances on board on the bridge that had wounded on it, and they all died.
With the Rhine now behind them, Nazi resistance slowly began to collapse.
We were making maybe 20, 30 kilometers a day. We were just moving. We didn't have any real major big city battles. Most of the time they surrendered.
But when they crossed into Czechoslovakia, over 3 years of constantly being the first into action took its toll. It even began to shape behavior towards their Nazi opponents.
The last few days of the war, they'd come out with their hands up and say, "Comrade, comrade," you know. And initially, we were taking them prisoners. But they killed and wounded a lot of us guys the last few days of the war. So that's when the colonel said, "Waste them," unofficially. So, hey, war, it's awful. It's awful.
The first sustained casualties until the 8th of May, 1945, when the Nazis finally surrendered.
You know, it was just another day. All it meant to us was we can sleep. So I laid down, and I must have slept for 24 hours. I was beat.
And the veterans of so much conflict, leading the way into action in Africa, Sicily, France, and Germany, could finally return home.
Both parents and my 3 sisters were home. They came running to meet me. And my father's first words were, "Well, son, maybe we can get a good night's sleep now."
Men of the Big Red One say the fact is that the US Army comprises them and 10 million replacements. And that was very much the ethos of the division. It was, you know, we are the first, we are number one.
Their bravery and extraordinary service in the war was recognized with the awarding of over 4,250 Silver Stars and 16 Medals of Honor. President Obama presented the last one, some 69 years later.
We've got here some photographs of Alfred B. Nietzel. He was a machine gunner serving on the heavy water-cooled 30 caliber machine guns. Alfred fought through North Africa. He took part in the invasion of Sicily, and then the regiment was transferred to England in preparation for D-Day. Alfred was billeted down in Dorset, and he met a young woman called Eileen C. White. They were married. They had a short honeymoon of about a week. And then on June 5th, Eileen heard that the troops were leaving. They were embarking upon the ships. So she went down with a friend to the docks in Weymouth to watch the GIs marching across. And amongst the hundreds of GIs that were there, they managed to spot one another. Sadly, that was the last time that they saw one another. He fought with the regiment all through France. Massive casualty rates, but Alfred managed to survive. He carried on fighting through Belgium and then finally into Germany, where he participated in the Hurtgen Forest campaign. They took essentially very, very similar casualties to what they sustained on Omaha Beach, so it was very, very atrocious fighting. What had actually happened is that Alfred had been manning his position. He stayed with his machine gun until his ammunition was expended, and then he took up his rifle and began firing before, sadly, a German hand grenade was thrown in and he died of his injuries. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions, which was then upgraded to the Medal of Honor in 2014 and presented to Alfred's cousin, Bob Nietzel, by Barack Obama. Perhaps one of the sadder parts of the story is there was never a picture or a photograph to his name. And thankfully, only in 2020 this year, we were able to track down a picture. We're able to tell it was in England because of the fact he's wearing the overseas cap. They're fantastic photos, and it really is nice to be able to put a face to his name.
Alfred Nietzel's outstanding bravery and sacrifice now form part of the legendary record of the Big Red One.
They had been thrown into the cauldron of war, and they managed to survive, and not only survive, but to thrive. As Terry Allen once said, nothing in hell must stop the 1st Division, and that's exactly what happened. Nothing in hell did stop the 1st Division.